Okay. Greetings, everyone, and thank you again for your attendance to our fourth Lenten Tabernacle King and Fear virtual seminar series. We've had such a great time here in our series regarding King and Fear and what his thought was and is about this idea of fear. This idea of fear. And we've had preeminent theologians in this space to talk about fear. And this week, we are very, very, very honored to have our great friend and theologian and preacher, the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Odell Blake. Dr. Blake is the presiding minister of the historic Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples. It is the church co-founded by the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman as the first intentionally interracial congregation in the United States in 1944. The question was, and one of the questions was, can the sacred experience be celebrated and be honored by all of us? Can it be honored by all of us in a corporate setting, in a time of Jim Crow and in such an incendiary sort of atmosphere of the 1940s? Dr. Thurman saw to it that there be a space for all of us to be able to celebrate. And so we're very honored to have the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Odell Blake, who is the presiding minister. He has the heavy honor of carrying the robe of Dr. Thurman, and also following Dr. Thurman here at this august church. He is also a teacher and a leader throughout the space in the public square at the Pacific School of Religion. And we're just very happy and honored to have him to speak about King and Fear, but this idea of fear in the beloved community, fear in the beloved community. And so as we begin, as usual, we want to provide just a few housekeeping notes for you. As you know, and those who have been watching and attending these seminar sessions, we have had, these are in and around 60 to 65-minute sessions. We do our brief introduction. We then are presented with the words from our guest speaker. We then dialogue with our guest speaker and take questions from those who are participating via Zoom on our Zoom link. And so that's how we'll continue during this session. We do look forward to such a great time together. And as we go forward here, let's engage and begin to think about what this idea of fear and the beloved community, their connection. And let's listen closely to our own Reverend Dr. Dorsey Odell Blake as he presents to us this wonderful and impactful notion. Now, as we begin, there has been a request that we play at the very beginning. We play the favorite song of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," being played by the pianist Don Shirley. After you hear this particular selection, the next voice you will hear is the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Odell Blake.
Thank you. I was unable to hear the song, so that's why I didn't know quite when to come on. But I wanted that played because, as Aaron Grizel said, it was Martin Luther King's favorite song. And I want to remind everyone that this coming Monday will commemorate 54 years since his assassination and 55 years since his famous speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. Actually, Pacific School of Religion will have at 12 o'clock on campus, we'll have a reading of that extraordinary speech. The Precious Lord, Take My Hand was a song that was so deeply meaningful to him. And it talks in a way about his own fear and yet his understanding that there is a force, there is a reality, some call it God, that holds us, and provides the kinds of resources, the wisdom, the strength we need for our days ahead. There is a scripture which I just want to put forth, not that I'm going to do a lot with it, but it's, and fear them not which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. King's soul was not destroyed because he overcame his fear. Many years ago, I watched a VHS. Some of you might recall those days when there were VHSs, and it explored the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, his impact on people and community. There was certainly one person there that you could recognize as being part of King's, let's say, entourage, and many others that you would probably consider that you might know in terms of civil rights leadership. There was one woman there who was 19 years old during the 1963 Birmingham campaign. When the interviewer moved to her to ask her about King's impact, she said, "He took the fear out of us." He took the fear out of us. This may be one of the most profound assessments I've ever heard of the impact of King's life on individuals and communities that through this removal of fear became individuals and communities of resistance. Not only resistance, but individuals and communities open to the beloved community. I don't know if we can comprehend adequately that the whole system of segregation was predicated on fear. I don't know if we can feel the pervasive violation of the personhood of our sisters and brothers in Birmingham, which was nicknamed Bombingham because of the plethora of bombings of Black churches, homes, Black businesses, with essentially no legal recourse. Fear, blatant, was as an all-pervasive hounding of the lives of the disinherited, the Black residents of Birmingham. Martin Luther King, in his classic letter from Birmingham jail, addressed those white clergy who urged him to wait, who castigated him for moving too rapidly and forcefully to gain civil rights for the Black community, outsiders from their point of view. He said that perhaps it was easy for people who had not suffered the horrors of racism to say, wait. The quote, "But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters, with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers and sisters smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait, unquote. We need to understand that the white clergy were actually asking Black people to remain afraid and to not agitate, to not seek their God-given rights, to not participate in even moving toward the beloved community. Just a few days ago, President Biden signed into law the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. What an indictment on this nation, that it took so long to pass such a law. What an indictment that such a law is necessary. It is being said that approximately 5,000 Black people have been victims of lynching. Between 1885 and 1894, there were 1,700 lynchings. Divide that 1,700 by the 9 years, and you'll find that there are 200 lynchings per year, just about one every other day. The lynchings led to the founding of the Niagara Movement, predecessor to the creation of the NAACP. And these lynchings were carried out by Christians, especially the Christian group, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. So it is not surprising to me that many of the people who stormed the Capitol building January 6th last year were Christians, or that Virginia Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, also felt that Christ was leading her and her mob to overturn election results. It is interesting, the fear that was so much a part of living in not only Birmingham, the South, and many other places. I think about my own experiences there. When I left the Bay Area in 1972 in January to teach at the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, as the first Black full-time male faculty and the first Black person to teach in the College of Arts and Sciences full-time. One of my experiences was to visit a white church, Alberta Baptist Church. The reason I did this was that I taught a basic class on the Black religious experience. And part of what I did was to have students go to churches so that they could experience what we were talking about in the class. I did not want the class to merely be an academic intellectual matter without connecting what we were studying to the real lives of people. Well, Alberta Baptist Church advertised that they were having a revival and that everyone was welcome. My class went to the revival that started that Sunday morning. We were just a few minutes late, and they were singing the doxology, praise God from whom all blessings flow, praise God, all creatures here below. And we were stopped by the deacons who were outside. They approached us and asked us why we were there. I told them who I was. I was professor at the University of Alabama, and this was a class. And we had come to experience the worship service at Alberta Baptist Church. I was told that they did not allow niggers there, and that there was a nigger church around the corner that we could attend. They then called the police on us, and I called the press. I left and called the press. One of the most frightening, not frightening, it was, I don't know how I would say it. It was, I think, an anxious moment for both of us. One of my former students had become the first Black on the police force. And yet he ended up being part of the force, pushing us back to the sidewalk. There was one young man, white man from the church, who started engaging some of the students. And he said, "Oh, you just came here for the worship service?" And we said, "Yes." And his response was that, "Well, why is there a problem?" They immediately grabbed him and pulled him out of the way. I was finally told that the pastor would talk with me, and I denied going into that building for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was not going in there by myself, not knowing what might happen. And number two, I told him that he needed to talk with my students. They had been offended by his actions. Well, a meeting was set up for me to talk with the pastor, Reverend Joe Bob Weissel. And in our conversation, he actually told me that he believed in desegregation and he wanted his church to be desegregated. But there were others opposed to it. And he thought that if he pushed for desegregation, he would lose members. He also stated that his father was a janitor, and now he, the son, had become pastor of this church in Tuscaloosa, which meant he did not want to lose his job. I tried to give him an alternative to say, well, maybe if you desegregate, there will be other people, young people, who will join your church because they're looking for a church that is not afraid to take the side of desegregation and integration in this particular time. This is 1975. To make a long story short, he did not come to class, although he had agreed to. He changed his phone number, and I never heard from him again when I tried to contact him. But we were able to, his concern was that we were going to do like those people in the civil rights movement and force them to integrate. They were concerned whether or not other people were going to join and we'd have a demonstration. And I assured him that I was not about to demonstrate, but there were white people who were so upset with what had happened that they planned to have a rally. And I told them the only way to prevent that from happening was for me to be informed that they had, in fact, voted to desegregate. So Saturday night, around midnight, I received a call saying that from the board, saying that they had just met and decided to desegregate the church. But this fear, what is the fear of that was holding them back, that perhaps continues to hold them back? What was the fear? In his book, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass talks about the fact that the most vicious of the slave masters were Christians. Robert P. Jones, who's head of the Public Religion Research Institute, wrote a book called White Too Long. And he said that the more racist attitudes a person holds, the more likely he or she is to be identified as a white Christian. So we've got a lot to do in terms of opening up of the white Christian church to even the ideal of beloved community or even desegregation. Another experience, I was going down from Tuscaloosa to Selma for a meeting of the Baptist State Congress. And I had not eaten all that day, and I decided, well, I'm really hungry and I need to get some food. I looked and there was a diner off the highway. And for 1 second, I thought about going and getting something to eat. The next A second, I realized that if I pulled off the highway, that might be my last supper, and there'd be nobody around with grape juice and some bread to celebrate what had happened. But there's this fear that permeated the life of Black people and white folks in Alabama and elsewhere. It's something that the body even learns not to go certain places because they know what the potential is for fear. What is fear? Well, Dr. King certainly talks about it in his antidotes for fear. And I want to spend just a little time, though, sharing with you what Dr. Howard Thurman says about fear. Because last week, certainly Reverend Dr. Valerie Miles Tribble did a fabulous job in dealing with one of the same sermons that I am dealing with, the Antidotes for Fear by Dr. King. Thurman says fear arises out of a sense of isolation and helplessness in the face of the varied dimensions of violence to which the underprivileged are exposed. There is a sense of defenselessness against authorities. Always back of the threat is a rumor or the fact that somewhere, under some similar circumstances, violence was used. That is all that is necessary. The threat becomes the effective instruments. So our bodies, remember, even if we personally have not been assaulted, we as people who are disinherited, Black people, so on, our bodies know at times not to go certain places, not to do certain things. Fear then, according to Thurman, becomes a safety device. It kept me from going to the diner, which the oppressed surround themselves with in order to give some measure of protection from complete nervous collapse. The fear that segregation inspires among the weak, he says, in turn breeds fear among the strong and the dominant. This fear insulates the conscience against a sense of wrongdoing in carrying out a policy of segregation, i.e., you're doing this in the defense of the race or your country, your religion. In other words, while the dominant folks are instilling fear in Black folks, they are fearful themselves of what might happen if Black people changed positions and became people with power and authority. Let's look at some of the antidotes to fear that King posits as essential to moving to or toward beloved community. First, he says we must face our fears without flinching. We must honestly ask ourselves why we are afraid. This confrontation will, to some measure, grant us power. We can never cure fear by the method of escapism, nor can it be cured by repression. The more we attempt to ignore and repress our fears, the more we multiply our inner conflicts and cause the mind to deteriorate into a slum district. Second, we can master fear through courage. Courage is the power of the mind to overcome fear. It is an inner solution to go forward in spite of obstacles and frightening situations. This antithesis, cowardice, is a submissive or surrender to circumstance. The third antidote to fear is love. The New Testament is right in saying, he said, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. And who fears is not perfected in love. Now, what does all this have to do with the fears that are so prevalent in the modern world, such as the fear of war, the fear of economic displacement, the fears accompanying racial injustice, and the fears associated with personal anxiety? It seems like this was written just yesterday when King talks about the deteriorating international situation. He said, we usually think that war comes from hate, but a close scrutiny of responses will reveal a different sequence of events. First hate, first fear, then hate, then war, then deeper hatred. If the nightmarish nuclear war engulfs our world, God forbid, it will not be because at that time he said Russia and America first hated each other, but because they first feared each other. And I don't have time to go into our present situation in Ukraine and with Russia, but it comes out of fear. It not only comes out of fear between those two countries, it comes out of fear, the Russian fear of NATO constantly moving closer and closer and closer to its borders with weapons. NATO is a military alliance and had violated the agreement reached in 1989 that they would not move any further than they already were, and yet they have. So that is part of the fear. And certainly the Ukrainians have been afraid that the Russians, and they have, would invade their territory. There's the fear from the West of the Russian domination. There's the fear in Russia of Western domination. So all of this comes out of the idea of fear, the fear that we haven't come yet to understand that we must learn how to live with each other, or perish, as King said, as fools. We have to develop situations where there is warmth, where there's understanding, where we try to work together over a period of time and begin to understand that we're all part of this world house that King talked about, this tent in which we must all live. Hatred often begins, Thurman says, in a situation in which there is contact without fellowship, contact that is devoid of any of the primary overtures of warmth and fellow feeling and genuineness. Contacts without fellowship tend to express themselves in the kind of understanding that is strikingly unsympathetic. An unsympathetic understanding tends to express itself in the active functioning of ill will. Ill will, when dramatized in a human being, and I would say in a nation, becomes hatred walking on the earth.